Hello, I'm Nan Simonson, and today for my Facebook Live, I'm doing a recap of a 2 hour interview. The interviewer I admire tremendously, in that he walks the walk of a man who at once was addicted, this is Rich Roll, to alcohol and drugs, went into a health mode, which included becoming what at one time um, earned him the title of the health or of the I think it was best athlete in America or the healthiest man in America, as a mega Ironman accomplisher. Rich Roll has a whole story there, but he's whole food, plant based. He interviews people of interest and who aren't always or not completely, but he's in that kind of a health space. Well, he interviewed Dr. Gemma Newman, a British whole food, plant based uh, physician, family practice physician, and in England, with their health system, the physicians will have groups of patients, like she has 3,000 in a group. And by a group, I mean these are her patients that she can see as often as they want to see her. They may be short visits, but she's then able to follow them. And unlike America, where if you see your doctor about a hurt knee and then get referred to a specialist, that doctor would take care of your knee. If you're having a baby, she would deliver the baby. That doctor would deliver the baby, your GP, not your gynecologist, even though she works in women's health and went through some intensive training and practice in women's health. She is a family practice physician. So Dr. Gemma Newman, they had, as said, a 2 hour interview, and the title of it is basically women's health. Women's hormone health and a plant-based diet. And I thought I would offer to you my efforts in getting as much as I could out of that by putting it together in notes and summarizing what is there. And then I'll also, after this, I'll share with you the link to that interview if you'd like to hear it in full. Because at my age, I'm 71, I learned a lot about the women's health issues as it relates to hormones. I learned a lot more than I'd ever known, and things like this would have been handy to know. I am a health and wellness coach. I wrote Aging Powerfully a year and a half ago. It was an Amazon bestseller. I think I can say it is an Amazon bestseller. And the point of my book and the point of my mission is to help people understand that through lifestyle modalities, lifestyle practices, we can add decades to our life. I'm hoping for another 1, 2, preferably 3 decades at this point, and the only way I'll do that happily is if I do it well. And I'll do it well by following these modalities that I outline in my book. My book is partially memoir. I had an eating disorder for a good part of my life, most of my life, that I was able to, I'll call it shed, more than 3.5 years ago. And I talk about that in my book and a few other things that led to my, I'll call it passion for my mission to spread the word, because we are anything but a healthy society in America, and that is spreading all over Western cultures around the world because of, I'll call it affluence and some really bad influences from industry in terms of what they call food. So I'm going to, in essence, just offer my notes to you. This won't be a chatty conversation. This will be more like uh, a read conversation. I hope you're all right with that. And there's a lot of information here. You can play this back, but you may want to simply go to the source. So, women's health is differentiated from men's health in ways that have a lot to do with the differences in our bodies. We can bear children. In order to do that, we have organs that they don't have. We have a hormonal system they don't have, and it helps regulate our ability to create children from puberty all the way to menopause. And those are puberty for one, menopause for another, are huge hormonal changing periods in our life that cause physiological, not just, well, psychological, not just physiological changes. Um, what does diet have to do with any of this? Well, interestingly enough, Dr. Newman studied exactly that, and she did it through her own body because she came about a better diet because her husband came about a better diet, interestingly enough, because of Rich Roll. Decades ago, and she's practiced this for quite a while, for decades, but decades ago, her husband was a marathoner, wasn't doing well, had a lot of injuries, and he came across uh, Rich Roll's book, Finding Ultra. And he wrote that because he was an ultra marathoner, and he wrote a book about that. And Rich Roll sang the praises of the dietary change that he made that made a huge difference, and that was including and increasing plants in his diet, pushing out meats. He went full vegan, full force. And she isn't in this conversation saying that people have to do that. So keep listening, even though you may be thinking, man, don't pull me into that. I'm not going there now, or yet, or maybe never. But she saw dramatic changes in his ability to take on additional physical stresses. She said his next marathon, after he was substantially into whole food plant based, was an hour and a half, something like that, shorter than the one before. He didn't then get injuries. His recovery time was remarkable. So she, and even though she went for quite a while after that without adopting it, she was watching and watching, became more and more convinced. She went on a whole food plant-based diet and then realized, this is how I can help my patients. And she has done that as the plant-based doctor ever since. She's written a book in that expresses her beliefs in that. She began by quoting a study by Dr. Neil Barnard, an American doctor. He is the leader of PCRM, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And this study showed that a plant-based diet, as opposed to the standard American diet in two different groups. So this was a blind study. There were two groups. I don't know if you'd call that a blind study, but it was a well done study. But the group on the plant-based diet had less pain and less bleeding during their menstrual periods than those that didn't. Why? Because a diet that is whole foods, meaning not processed, whole plant foods, meaning filled with phytonutrients, phytochemicals, polyphenols, is anti-inflammatory. And inflammation is the base of most chronic diseases. Most of the diseases we see in our country, cancers, heart disease, joint diseases, the arthritises that can cripple people, including rheumatoid arthritis, autoimmune diseases, a lot of those are inflammation based. not to mention the fiber we get and the so far unidentified elements that we get in plants that, as they are identified, quite often become pharmaceuticals. We'll be talking about hormones in this conversation. There are over 50 hormones that affect a woman's body, and they have to work in unison for optimum health, not just in female hormone health, but also optimal health for our skin, our brain function, the function of our organs like the pancreas that regulates insulin, like our thyroid, and thyroid regulates metabolism and more, the adrenals, which regulate our ability for stress, and of course the female organs. So we're going to begin with the menstrual cycle because that's what is one of the primary physical parts of a woman's body that differentiates us from a man, the ability to have children. And the whole point of the menstrual cycle is that our body builds up a cushion for a potential fertilized egg that would live in the womb and then produce a baby. And that's what the menstrual cycle is. When that hasn't happened, the tissues, which have been enriched with blood, slough off. The ease or the difficulty with which we experience monthly cycles have a lot to do with estrogen exposure and hormonal exposures in foods, because there are a lot of hormones in foods, and we'll talk about that, and plastics in our diet, and toxins in the things we put on us, the things that we eat, the things that we get even from cooking materials. In other words, our hormones are regulated and affected by a lot of things, and those things will affect the ease with which, or the difficulty with which, the monthly cycle is experienced. I'll say girls, because they are girls at that point, now are having their beginning of their cycles earlier and earlier. Some of them 10 and 11 years old. And part of the downside of that, that's not a good thing. And part of the downside of that is a increase in cardiovascular disease when that happens. One of the practical things that we can do to ameliorate, to diffuse, to weaken the effect of these exogenous hormones, that are flooding our system, and the toxins, is to eat more fiber. And why is that? Because when we eat plenty of fiber, we'll get to the microbiome later. That's usually my stomping ground when it comes to fiber. But I hadn't realized this until I heard Dr. Newman say it, that the fiber has traditionally always been spoken of as a way to prevent constipation. Increased dietary fiber, not just a little can of Metamucil, is ideal. And that helps push stool through and keep the body cleaned out. If that doesn't happen, then our stool, that material, stays in our body longer, and what it's supposed to do is pass toxins out of our body in a relatively regular and as quick as possible way, short of diarrhea. And the fiber in foods can help that, not only regularity, but the ease with which it passes, and the bulk. And the value of that is that it takes toxins and excessive hormones along with it. We don't want those things sitting on our body being reabsorbed into our system, which is what happens when somebody is constipated. I didn't know that. Upping fiber can be one of the quickest and easiest ways to make our diet overall more healthy, because in addition to that, of course, it feeds our microbiome, that 34 trillion cells in our gut. It's all over our body, but primarily in our colon, that are responsible, and I'll get to that a little bit later, but are responsible for a lot of the factors of health and the regulation in our body of a lot of our systems. There's something called hormone binding globulin. It's an element in our body that regulates the expression of hormones, regulates the expression. And it helps our body prevent an overabundance of certain things like circulating estrogens. The hormone binding globulin is positively affected by a whole food, plant-based dietary style. Doesn't mean whole food, plant-based exclusive. It means plenty of whole foods that are plant-based introduced into the diet. Another element that you may not be familiar with is something called prostaglandins. Prostaglandins are lipid compounds with hormone-like effects. They're responsible for the pain during periods, because during menstruation, we're getting really real here, aren't we? During menstruation, the bleed pain is caused by contractions that the prostaglandins are responsible for. Anti-inflammatory foods, such as those in a whole food plant-based diet, help reduce prostaglandins, in which case it helps reduce the severity of the contractions, which help reduce the severity of the pain. An example of whole foods that are plant-based also include spices and herbs. For example, turmeric and ginger have been shown to be as effective in pain reduction as NSAIDs, non-steroidal hormone, NSAID, non-steroidal inflammatory something. I could have said that to you 10 minutes ago and it won't come out of my mouth now, but NSAIDs are known, like Tylenol, ibuprofen, Motrin, things like that. Endometriosis is another challenge for women. It often goes undiagnosed and causes painful periods, heavy bleeding, and is a serious condition. Endometrial cells can go anywhere in our body, including our brain, but that's very rare. And prostaglandins cause, when the prostaglandins are active, we're trying to cut back on those. Whole food, plant-based diets help with that. Why? Because partially they're anti-inflammatory, partially we're also building the cell integrity, and again, we'll talk a little more about that. But the prostaglandins cause the endometrial cells, which can go out of the uterus, where they can grow and become a profusion, can be on the outside of the uterus, but can attach themselves to any organ, to the lung, as I said, to the brain, which is rare. And when the prostaglandins cause the contractions of those endometrial cells and additional bleeding, they can cause that anywhere that endometriosis is in the body. That can be treated, but it has to be diagnosed first. And endometriosis is a little bit more tricky to diagnose, but she reminded women listening, if you have extreme pain during periods, if you have very heavy bleeding, if you have strong cramping, see your gynecologist and get that diagnosed, because if it's endometriosis, it's something that doesn't simply just go away. There's an association, as I said earlier, no, actually I maybe alluded to, there is an association between the consumption of certain animal products and deposits of endometrial tissues, as well as fibroids. Partially, that is due to the hormonal load of most animal products. They're injected, but even if they're not injected in farm-raised animals, Things like dairy are loaded with hormones because what are we drinking? What are we making into cheeses and yogurts? All of that is a now, as we produce dairy, pregnant cow who is also lactating for the baby who never gets to drink because those babies are removed from their mothers immediately, which we won't even go into the animal, uh, the care of animals at that point. We'll simply say that that milk is loaded with estrogens in order to grow a healthy cow in a very quick period of time. So fibroids, what are fibroids? They're growths in the womb that are affected by estrogen. They can cause excessive bleeding and pain during periods, especially the ones inside the womb, which press up against the lining and cause additional bleeding. They can form on the outside of the womb as well. Sounds like endometriosis. And all of these challenges can be positively affected and improved with a plant-rich, fiber-rich diet. Increasing fiber has a downstream benefit in including weight loss. And our additional body fat is, especially visceral, which tends to be around the middle, is metabolically active. Our body fat, especially visceral fat, actually produces estrogen and other hormones. So it's not just a benign layer of lipids. It actually can have its own downstream effect in terms of the hormonal load on our body from a place that you wouldn't even guess. All the plant fibers feed the microbiome, which balance our neurotransmitters and hormonal hormones and can help reduce weight because those hormones we're talking about include ghrelin and leptin. Ghrelin is what tells us we're hungry, leptin is what tells us we're full. That helps with weight reduction, but fiber helps with weight reduction because it fills us up and it satisfies us. And it also helps reduce the chance of constipation where all that stool sits there and a lot of elements in it get reabsorbed. Are you seeing that all of this has a sort of a loop type association? Lifestyle interventions such as maintaining proper weight does make a difference in how you feel in general and in women's health, because I said those cells are bioactive and can cause and exacerbate many of the things that we're talking about today. I mentioned ginger and turmeric. They've shown to be anti-inflammatory. They've shown to reduce the amount of prostaglandins in the uterus and thus reduce pain in periods, endometriosis, and fibroids. And it's not a rare occurrence that plants and plant foods can have such a difference considering the thousands of elements in plant phytochemicals, phytonutrients, polyphenols that I mentioned earlier that haven't even yet been identified. Polycystic ovarian syndrome can also be positively affected by a whole food plant-based diet. Polycystic ovarian syndrome is very much driven by insulin resistance, and insulin resistance is beneficially affected by whole foods and the whole food plant-based lifestyle. Again, the goal is to maintain an anti-inflammatory diet. Meat and dairy cause multiple hormone exposures, including estrogens and phthalates, PHTHALATES. Look that up. PHTHALATES. Those are the elements that are used in the manufacture of plastics to make the plastic pliable and stronger. We're exposed to plastics in everything that we eat, including in animals. Phthalates, elements used in making plastics, have been found In the U.S., even in our animal supply, the animal food we eat, in the U.S., the greatest concentration are in chickens. Now, that may have to do with their feed. That may have to do with the even free range chickens now are in these huge multiple football field size closed um, enclosures, usually roofed enclosures, and they call that free range. Well, the ground that they're scratching could have plastics of some kind or another because that ground is dirt and other things to keep it stable. Um, and in England, which is where Dr. Newman lives and practices, she practices in Surrey, their highest phthalate count is found in fish. And fish in the U.S. is just as bad in other ways because most of our fish are from overfished oceans, but also oceans full of mercury, again, microplastics, as well as mercury. So animal foods are not what we think they are when we simply focus on, but that's where I get my protein. Well, if you can get your protein from other sources that are cleaner and healthier, it's something to think about. All right, whole food plant-based, what's the big deal? The foods being referred to here are the foods that are as close to nature as you can get. The proteins that cows have, the proteins that chicken and fish have, come from the plant world. We're simply getting them secondhand from them. They're getting their protein and everything they need from the plant world, and then we eat them. Well, we can go straight to the source because what we're talking about when we refer to plant-based, whole food plant-based, and in my case, whole food plant exclusive, for more than 3.5 years, I gave up, and I have given up all animal products for the animals, for my health, for longevity, for uh, the planet, because we're running out of room and we could plant plenty of plants to keep us alive. There's only so many factory farms that we can have on this planet and not completely ruin our environment. And some of you don't want to know that, but it is true. I have a friend who just says, well, they have nothing to do with it. And I just kind of shake my head and think, my God, you just don't know. You can research this and you won't think I'm a hysteric if you do. Well, I guess it depends on who you read, doesn't it? So, gosh, Nan, I better leave this alone. So what are we talking about? We're talking about all vegetables, especially leafy greens, and the starchy vegetables, and the cruciferous vegetables that are the Brassica family, which is things like broccoli and kale and Brussels sprouts and cauliflower. So all the vegetables, all the fruits, as many colors as we can find, because the more colors, the better. We're talking about potatoes of all kinds. We're talking about beans of all kinds, grains of all kinds, seeds and nuts. Those nourish us down to our core, and they're as close to nature. If we eat them as close to nature as possible, they're going to feed us in every way that we need to be fed. My website, nansimonson.com, my YouTube channel, YouTube / Nan Simonson, with the space between Nan and Simonson. It seems to come up easier that way. Offers resources for recipes and other podcasts that can help you see how to make this happen. People like Chef AJ, people like Tammy of Nutmeg Notebook, the Physicians Committee on Responsible Medicine, Plant Strong, Forks Over Knives. All of those are resources for people who say, okay, I'll eat more plants. Stop talking, Nan, I'll eat more plants. Some of you will say, okay, I'm going to eat all plants. Even better. But one way or another, the more plants you eat, the better your body will be. Let me get back to women's health. Dr. Newman emphasizes the value of those whole plants, including And she said this food got a bad rap, and now we know it was a bad rap because it's something I recommend to all of my patients, and that's soy and whole soy foods and fermented soy foods like tofu, tempeh, miso. They have found soy to be preventative as well as curative in hormonal driven ailments such as prostate cancer, such as breast cancer, such as women's hormonally driven problems, which we've pretty well touched on throughout so far. Soy products are, and I'm quoting her, very beneficial. They block bioequivalent estrogens, meaning the estrogens that come from animals that are created in our bodies. They block their effect on creating tumor growth as well as other disruptions. And they act as a selective hormone modulator on a number of additional hormones. The plants we eat with value in variety will have an effect on what other plant materials our body is able to utilize for health-giving properties. In other words, there is a synergistic effect one to the other as it relates to whole foods that are plant-based. So the more we eat, the more variety, and I can't say this enough, so I won't stop saying it, the better our body works, the better our microbiome works. The microbiome creates something called short-chain fatty acids that affect every cell of our body in an anti-inflammatory and a balancing way. The only thing that creates those short-chain fatty acids like that in the microbiome, the only thing that works for that is fiber, because that's what the microbiome needs. The microbiome are microbes that eat one thing, they eat fiber. What has fiber? Only plants. So we want the wide variety because the variety feed the variety of microbes, and we want a big span of different types of microbes because the short chain fatty acids they produce are varied and are used differently in our body throughout. Okay, let's talk menopause. At 71, let's see, I think that was about 20 years ago for me, 21 years ago actually. Menopause, some consider a downside or the beginning of the end of feeling feminine. Dr. Newman said that her patients, when they go through menopause, a lot of them think that they have lost their usefulness as a woman, because after all, aren't we here to produce and raise young children? Heck no. On the other hand, another way to consider that is that menopause is empowering. We are no longer having monthly cycles. That's kind of a relief. If we stay on top of our hormones, because there are changes, and you can watch her and listen to her as she talks about this, changes hormonally that can cause some unpleasant symptoms, all of which can be somewhat ameliorated by a whole food plant-based diet because of the short chain fatty acids that are produced in the microbiome and the effect they have on our organs and our cells. But rather than seeing this as a diminishing stage, she brought something up that I didn't know, and I thought this was fascinating. There are only 3 mammals in existence that have a menopause. In other words, whose bodies go through a metamorphosis that stops something that allows them to continue to breed. And those 3, Rich Roll guessed, would have had something to do with primates, because those are the species we're closest to, and that wasn't so. And then he guessed dolphins, and she said, nope, that's not so either. She said those animals are humans, orca whales, and pilot whales. And she said you'll even see in a pod of pilot whales that and this is where she added value. as a kind of umbrella to the concept of women, human women, being in an even greater position, because without that stepping into a mothering role, all of our time and attention can be used not only to take care of ourselves, but also to secure the additional growth through our assistance of the generations that come after us. We can do that. We become the I'll call it matriarchs, who can make a difference. And in the pilot whales, it's the grandmother whales that keep the babies near the mothers. I mean, I just loved this analogy because you could kind of see this in the ocean, and these are among mammals, and we actually are able to live that out. And when you think of it that way, it's lovely. One of the things she also spoke of is the value of hormone replacement therapy, that she explains got a bad rap and why she actually recommends it for women prior to menopause or just newly in menopause, to help with osteoporosis as well as hormone fluctuations. But she said there's a window of opportunity there, and you'd have to listen to her to hear that. But I thought that was rather interesting because I never did that. It worked out just fine, but I never did that. Plastics, PBAs, the phthalates that I spelled out the word for, are endocrine disruptors. They have hormone mimicking effects that are affecting fertility, that is sperm count in men, and the hormonal health of women. The recommendation is to avoid the plastics, PBAs, the toxins in our waters, the toxins in our foods, the things we put on our skin. Really pay attention to what we're exposing ourselves to, because these endocrine disruptors can change the expression of the hormones in our body and disrupt, well, everything, including our mood, how we feel, levels of pain, how we grow older, our skin. She mentioned a recommendation to avoid drinking water out of plastic bottles, because they're finding the microplastics in those plastic bottles, especially those that have been left out in the sun. And she said, if you can afford it, get, and this is something that I did 10 years ago, get a water filter, a dependable water filter. Ours happens to be an under the sink reverse osmosis unit. Some people get a whole house unit so that they're even showering with water that doesn't have the municipal chemicals, but also don't have these things in them that affect us. But she said, if you can afford it, get a water filter, because new reports are showing microplastics have even been found in human bloodstream. And there may not be a way to avoid it at this point, but there sure is a way of cutting back on that. And we should reduce our exposure whenever possible. She also recommended, if you're going to heat food in the microwave, never do it in plastic. I've been saying this in my videos, my cooking videos, for a long time. If you get a bag of, for example, a meal in one of those plastic bags that you can just put in the microwave, or rice, even at Trader Joe's, a store that I trust a lot with their presentation of food, they sell frozen organic rice. I won't take one of those bags that the rice comes in, put it in the microwave, poke the hole or whatever they tell you to do and cook it, because you're cooking in plastic. As soon as you heat plastic, you have the plastic degrading. So don't put hot food in plastics to store it. I store a lot in plastics. If you saw my freezer demonstration on YouTube, if you saw my cupboard and my storage demonstration, I use a lot of plastics. I owned a Tupperware franchise, Tupperware warehouse, for nearly 20 years. I was with Tupperware for 28 years, and I have a lot of that product, but nothing goes in it hot, nothing gets cooked in it. And if I could do everything in glass instead, I would do that. But I don't have the room for all that glass because I store a lot. Um, but I'm very aware of what the potential danger is. And that's just one thing that we wanted to remind you of. Um, Reduce saturated fats in your diet. She told a story of how Finland, 20 or 30 years ago, had the highest levels of cardiovascular disease in the world. One country, a little country, highest levels of cardiovascular disease. And the government got behind it. Wouldn't it be nice if we could do something like this in America? The government got behind it, recommended the elimination of red meat, recommended the reduction or elimination of dairy and dairy fat and saturated fats. 20 years later, 23, something like that, the cardiovascular disease has been reduced in Finland by 80%. This is an entire country that got behind a campaign. 80%. Saturated fat matters. Keep it out of your diet as often as you can. It does make a difference to our arteries, our arterial health, and therefore that number one killer of Americans and actually most people worldwide, cardiovascular disease. It's no fun to get old if your heart is no longer working well. Everything hurts, everything is hard. It's even hard to breathe because it's going to affect your lungs. So these things do matter. So where do we start if we want to shift to a more healthy diet? It's like you must be thinking, Dan, please stop. Where do we shift? What do we do? Well, okay, she gave she quoted something, and I thought, how do we even get our head wrapped around this? She said, at UCL in England, a study was done that showed that 200 unconscious food choices are made a day by us, and only 15 conscious food choices, meaning that a lot of what we do out of habit, we do out of mindlessly. And Rich Roll said, I don't even think I make 200 food choices a day, let alone conscious and unconscious. And so I wasn't even sure I was going to say that, but I thought that was interesting. And so she said to get out of the habit and get out of that mental bandwidth, some people will make sweeping changes. I did, Rich Roll said he did. Some people can't quite do that, but what we will say is much of our ability to change has to do with what's in our environment. In the case of in this case, starting simple and changing the environment in which we live can make a huge difference. Get rid of the things you don't want to eat. Get them out of your kitchen, because if, as Chef AJ says, if it's in your house, it's in your mouth eventually. I don't have anything in this kitchen in my kitchen that I wouldn't want to eat. It doesn't exist. And I had an eating disorder for almost 55 years. I know what it's like to find yourself face first in food. I had a friend that woke up every night and would eat. I never did that, but I know what it's like to be obsessed and addicted, or whatever you want to call it, to food. I just don't want that temptation, even though I have had plenty of temptation and just won't play it out. I don't ever want to go back there, and so that doesn't have that power. And yet, why play a game with owning something that you have no intention of eating? Get it out of the house. When you feel a weakness, make carrots the next easiest thing to do. Peel them, make them ready for you. It was funny because yesterday, for no reason, I had a big lunch and it wasn't dinner time. I really felt not even hungry as much as I really want something crunchy. So I cut a cucumber in half, and Trader Joe's has a chili lime seasoning that I put on jicama. I ended up going through they were the little Persian cucumbers, two little Persian cucumbers with lemon juice and then that chili lime seasoning, and it hit the spot. What if I didn't have that? Well, then I would have gone for maybe carrots or, cooked cold asparagus. I don't know. but we're always faced with times that surprise us, and that's just a weak example of what I'm talking about. Clean up your environment. This is what she recommends to her patients. Start with what you, she said, start with what you like and do simple swaps and crowd out meats and fats and for whole foods that are plant-based. Um, Plant-based foods are inexpensive, so don't fear the cost of that. It's a lot less expensive to buy beans and potatoes and grains than it is to buy steaks and chicken breast and fish. Fill your environment with these options, and when it comes down to a healthy choice, make that healthy choice the easy choice. There's also a social component when it comes to making a change in our diet. And social awareness, judgment can sometimes be hard for people to accept. What she found, even for herself, because she worried about that when she watched her husband get better, decided she was going to do it. She worried about what friends would think. And she said she decided to look at her values. She recommends that we make a list of 5 of our values, what we value in life, and then live in alignment with those values. I value a long, healthy life. I value watching my grandsons grow up and maybe even have babies, and they're only 8 and 11. I value feeling good. I value physical activity that doesn't hurt at all because I've kept myself healthy enough to not be sore all over. When I began, before I went whole food plant-based, I could barely pick up a pencil that dropped on the floor because everything hurt. My cholesterol was sky high. The cardiovascular recommendation or referral, the doctor told me, oh no, we've got to get you on statins. The rheumatoid arthritis doctor, oh no, we have to get you on immunosuppressants. The GP, oh no, we've got to get you on metformin because you're pre-diabetic. Do you know what a black hole that becomes? There's no reversal of disease there. They're simply masking it when you're living on pills, and then they give you pills for the pills. So if this stuff sounds a little bit like a nuisance, it's a lot more of a nuisance to live a life that's different than that, when you are spending so much time trying to fix what is at the end of your fork, because that could take care of, and a change there can take care of health for decades to come. So make a list of what matters to you and then live in alignment with that for yourself, your health, your family, your future, and the planet. And what I call global depletion, which is real. Dr. Newman suggests that in order to live in alignment, we keep those things uppermost in our mind, even possibly a list where you can see it on a daily basis. We can bring it down to conscientiously living with the things in life that matter and those values, and as we feel the pull to go back to old habits, bring those up on a regular basis as clearly in our mind as we would what it felt like at one time to sit down to a hamburger and fries, which could really light up your desire center. But if we're clear enough on our values, that becomes our desire center. Focusing on our own health has power initially, but that ends up waning, and that's why we're looking for things that are more long-term, like the animal compassion, like health of the earth, knowing what we can, or what we do can matter to others, that can keep us focused as well. Okay, and she reminds us that there is value, great value, in being plant strong, plant focused, whole food focus. We're not talking about refined foods here, because it can be refined plant foods and they're no better for you than a lot of the animal foods that we're talking about, because they don't carry the same power of feeding the microbiome, because it's the whole food elements that we can't even identify that feed those gut bugs. As it relates to bringing others along with us in our journeys, especially our partners, make it about you and your needs, and don't focus on them and their resistance. Because Rich Roll asked her about this and said sometimes it can break families apart when one decides to take care of their health and the other isn't ready. And Dr. Newman addressed this when she said that she and her husband were cooking separate meals, that she watched him for a year and a half, maybe it was two, as a whole food plant directed athlete, while she was still eating her omnivore diet until she decided to change. And she said he let her take it at her own pace. The people in your lives may need time, or they may never come around, but instead of instilling into the mix resentment and criticism and judgment and expectations, which are not helpful, set an example and live your own truth. And that's hard to do, because I look at people in my life that I worry about, that I know are heading down the wrong road in terms of health risks based on dietary style. And I have to just do my thing and let that go. And that was hard to do. It is hard to do, but let it go, was her best advice. Ultimately, making the change comes down to what we see for ourselves in our future. And as I say, I see for my future a mission of helping people age powerfully. I walk around, I look around, and I see the wreck, the physical wrecks all around me of people who have bought into, got caught into what we are told to eat every day based on the food industry, the garbage that they put in front of us and tempt us with in commercials. And I think, my gosh, nobody has any business putting things like that in their mouths. And you can see the bodies changed by it all around you. And my mission is to do exactly what I'm doing right now. If 3 people watch this and one of you changes, well, gosh, 30% wouldn't be bad. That would make me happy. But I know that word is getting out and people are understanding that changes that we make, that sometimes we do from one standpoint like health, can end up as it has for me and my husband. And he changed as quickly as I did over 3.5 years ago. We both not only feel better than we have ever felt, and he is almost 70, and we are able to do things that we couldn't do before because of energy level, no sickness, no medications, and we thank every day for that. But the most important part is that we love our food. We love what we eat and how it tastes. And you have to trust that that will, if you become more plant-based, more plant-strong, possibly plant-exclusive, you have to trust that you will adore your food. It's so pure, it's so delicious. We neuroadapt and our taste buds turn over every 7 days. And we can, or 2 weeks, is it 14 days? They turn over quickly, and we can adapt to any taste. The problem is that manufactured food is high in oil, sugar, and fat, and that combination fires up our brain and simply makes us want more. Whole foods don't have that combination. There's nothing in nature that's full of fat, sugar, and salt. And there's a reason for that, because it's very hard to stop eating it. So be ready for a bit of a challenge, but you can do it if I did. Some of us jump in with both feet. Some of us take tiny steps. She suggests writing down what you buy in a week, then write down what you make with it, and then consider one or a few changes that can make those plant-based foods enjoyable. In other words, you take the meat out, you put the plants in, even a couple of dishes a week, and then make it an extra dish, and then make it an extra dish. She said, how does it feel? Evaluate the value of the change as you make it step by step if you need to. It's been shown that one thing, just one thing that makes a positive change can lead us and lead others to another change and then another and another. You eat a healthy lunch, you want to take a walk, that walk brings you sunshine and fresh air and raises your mood. The next day you add an extra apple to that, your bowel movement is better and you think, there's something here. In other words, this isn't just talk. This is potential and possibility all available down the road. And then what about meat analogs? What about Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger? These can help in transitioning. They're not ideal, but they can help in transitioning, and whatever helps in transitioning is worthwhile. They even showed in a study that people that use those analogs can have a better and more diverse microbiome, even though a lot of those I'll use the word again, meat analogs, the fake meats, a lot of them have way too much fat, they have way too much sugar, they aren't a whole food, but not eating all that saturated fat and not eating the animal hormones that come in animal flesh, even that change made a difference and made them well worth it. She talked about a patient of hers, an older man who in England was buying prepackaged meals. And she said because he was 80 years old and he had high cholesterol and high blood pressure. And she said, swap out every day, because most of his meals were packaged, swap out every day at least one whole food packaged meal for a mixed meal. And he did that, and then he started swiping more and more. And the next time she saw him, his blood pressure and cholesterol had gotten down to normal. So it doesn't always take that much to make a difference. So if you need to start, consider a vow to yourself. And and that vow can be anything. Every day in every way, I'm getting better and better. That's something. Well, Dr. Newman recites something in Japanese. She actually recited it in Japanese and translated it. And she says it every day. Her daily mantra is this: just for today, do not be angry. Do not be worried. Be grateful. Do your duties fully. And be kind to all loving things. I thought that was very sweet. And say to yourself, just for today, I can do anything. Just for today, I can eat healthier. Just for today, I can add an apple. Just for today, I'll have a big salad with a lot of whole food starch in it to make it satisfying. Cubed potatoes, quinoa, beans. Don't think a salad with nothing but greens and a few pieces of crunchy vegetable is going to keep you full. You've got to have that balance of that satisfying whole food carbohydrates. 70 to 75% of my diet is whole food carbohydrates, potatoes, grains, legumes, for additional satisfaction, seeds and nuts made into sauces, and then massive amounts of colorful fruits and vegetables. And man, oh man, does it satisfy. I think that's it. I've gone a long time. I'm done. Aren't you glad? And I hope you got something out of this. I'm going to put the YouTube connection on the on my comments, or in my comments, and when I put this on YouTube, it'll actually be part of the the description. So have a great day, because I know I'm going to. Thumbs ups always make a difference. Sharing always makes a difference. If you can resonate with this message, consider it. Consider reading Aging Powerfully, I'm Told. It's a good book. And take care. Bye-bye.